Hey, Lisa.
Oh,
Thanks for getting together with me today.
yeah, it's my pleasure.
Lisa Elliot is the organizer, the creator of the Vegas Study Group online, a Facebook group. You can say more about it, but that's how we know each other. And
Mm-hmm.
you just do such a beautiful job, like holding the space for learning about the polyvagal theory and lots of related stuff. And I just have been curious about connecting with you around your thoughts and experiences around the intersection of the polyvagal theory and creativity.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about that.
I would say it's impossible to keep it in a small box of polyvagal theory. It's like polyvagal theory is um it's like the messenger but not the message, so we kind of keep popping out into other areas of our anatomy. Like the polyvagal theory is pretty focused on neurology, neurobiology.
Yeah, and would you just give also like a little, for those people that are new to the polyvagal theory, a little background?
Yeah. My strength is in map making, in creating systems. So I also have a pretty noticeable memory deficit, which is an interesting because of a health challenge I had. So it's very interesting that, when asked to like describe technical specifics, I haven't retained them. I've exposed myself to so much technical information, and then I go away from it, and it's interesting what I retain. So polyvagal theory is pretty technical, and it was created by Stephen Porges only in the 90s, so not that long ago, to sort of remap the autonomic nervous system to account for the role of social engagement, the role of relationships in managing threat and safety. So it hooked up immediately with attachment theory, and they are uh, you know um, intertwined in a very permanent way. And for those who don't know what attachment theory is, it's really about the way our perception of safety and our biology of safety and threat are established early in life, even before we're born. So there's a lot about the way our physiology adapts to expectations about how safe our environment is going to be. Everything is reflected in our biology. And in the nervous system in particular, we can see messages of safety and threat moving through the nervous system in the ways that were conceived of a long time ago around fight or flight. But the system is much more complicated than that because we are such social animals. So a child in their mother's arms, for example, let's make it mother, is being formed in their perception of threat and safety, their biology of threat and safety, and their sources of resilience for managing threat through the relationship. So polyvagal theory updates fight or flight to take into account social bonding as a strategy for both perceiving threat and regaining safety. So there's a wide variation in across all people in our early experiences. And it makes perfect sense. My bias is towards thinking of the body as incredibly adaptive and rarely broken. And I think it's worth missing some ways that we might even have some physiological damage to say, let's just assume that your body is working beautifully and perfectly.
I love
And
that.
it's such a joyous place to start, I think, and empowering. It's like, okay, my body's doing the right thing. And what purpose is the way I am? What purpose is that serving? What adaptive, positive function is that serving? So wrapping back to polyvagal theory, if we take into account that part of the physiology of detecting and communicating and responding to threat and safety is this, literally, the anatomy of this other branch of the autonomic nervous system. That's the vagus nerve, the famous, very popular vagus nerve. And so it's the part of our anatomy that's going to be most active when we are accessing safety, recharge, repair relationships. And we really repair and come back to center through the activity of that part of our anatomy. That message is moving predominantly through that part of our anatomy. And then we connect with other aspects of our bodies, other parts of this completely interrelated dancing system, to regulate the way we are interacting with our experience. So that's a bunch of little eddies and swirls and not very linear, but I hope that gives people some idea of what polyvagal theory is about.
Would you describe also the ventral vagal and the dorsal vagal and the differences there?
Yeah. So the dorsal vagal is the oldest part of our nervous system. So the Stephen Porges relies on evolutionary theory to inform, to describe, why the nervous system would have been arranged in the way that it is in a human being. So the dorsal vagus is active when we are in predominantly like a last resort type of self-defense, protective response, which makes us shut down. If you see an animal go completely limp, or a human with no tone in their muscle in a way that's beyond relaxation, they're limp. They are out of options. So we'll see in human beings, we'll see numbness, dissociation, memory gaps, just a lot of things. And, it's not just one state. There's still quite a bit of variation in that when the activity of the system is moving through that dorsal vagus, which is both the anatomy of the nerve and the biochemistry and the brain functioning related to it. So there's no way to isolate it and say, well, it's about the dorsal vagus, so let's, push that button. It's the messenger through a broad system.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the sorts of behaviors we'll see when our body is really forced into that place of shutdown. And the ventral vagus is more evolutionarily modern. I don't know the millions of years ago that we're talking about, but it evolved in humans later, and it is myelinated. So the dorsal vagus is not myelinated. Myelination is a fatty coating around our what would it be? Anyway, our nervous system. Some don't know if it's synapses or the joints, dendrites, probably around the dendrites, the long parts, that makes it like a supercomputer. So it's much faster. So, for example, there's a theory of coaching and learning that I've used for many years that talks about the neuroanatomy of practice and focus. So when we are learning the violin, when we're learning aerial acrobatics, when we're learning to play chess, so it can be physical, it can be primarily cognitive, and we're doing repetitive behaviors, we're myelinating those pathways, and we're making them function much more quickly. We're making them come online as responses much more quickly. So the ventral vagus is myelinated. It's a more evolutionarily advanced system for functioning. And honestly, I've been studying this intensely for years, and I still get confused about the anatomy. So where in that is the vagus at the moment? It's not there. But the social engagement system is very fast, so it's probably the ventral vagus. That's right. Yeah. That's like 101. So there's me.
Thanks.
So social engagement responses are very rapid. Like, I will see changes in your body language, in your voice, in your expression, and probably beyond that, maybe there's a vibrational component to it in our interpersonal neurobiology, to where I'm going to pick up on changes in you and you're going to pick up on changes in me, and we'll pick up on something else in the room, and that's neuroception. And it's also what does Porges call it? Is it nociception? Is our response to the potential for pain is nociception. I can't remember if that's what Porges calls it. So that's basically the two main parts of the autonomic nervous system, but the poly does refer to the fact that there is a dedicated part of our nervous system that goes beyond fight or flight, that's about managing safety and threat through interpersonal connections, and it's vital to healthy functioning.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
And now, would you weave in this idea of how the polyvagal theory is related to creativity, or where they?
Yeah. So since we first touched base about having this conversation, I've been thinking about it in a more focused way. I have a background in aerial acrobatics, and performed in the Seattle area, professionally for quite a few years, and was a coach for many years. And I recognized that I have maybe in the past couple of years recognized, especially in a very informed way, but I always knew that there was something about the intensity of that activity that made me feel good and made me feel organized. And I think that was my starting place for recognizing that there's some benefit in meeting our bodies where they are at. So it's a little hard to know where to start on this subject, but I will say that my nervous system was tuned up in a way that made sense for my world. It was adaptive, and I'm grateful that my body was, so in such a state of readiness to deal with threat for so long. I was never comfortable trying to do activities that were very quiet, that were meant to be very calming, because that didn't match what my body was saying about the safety of my environment. It didn't match my history, didn't match what my body and probably what my ancestors' bodies knew about the environment. So I found that through doing intense activities like aerial acrobatics and riding a motorcycle and rock climbing, that those were places where I felt right. So I trust that. And it's been the background story for why I have such a positive take on what, it's a good starting place. I know things can get really dysfunctional in our lives, whatever our bodies might be doing, it can get to a point where it just doesn't work. So it's tough to say to somebody who's really suffering horribly and say, this is a positive adaptation. But for most of us, I think we can find some meaning and some empowerment in that our bodies are not against us. So if we are looking for experiences that somehow match our internal reality, what is creativity from that place? And I think, it's the broader question, what do we mean when we say creativity? And I have some ideas about that, as informed by what I know about the brain and what I know about polyvagal theory. But I would say it's a lot of things. Some of my most creative moments have come out of suffering or out of intensity. When I'm madly in love, that's when the poetry happens. It also happens when my heart is broken. There's something that shifts in those extreme states. And those are not times when I am open and playful and at peace. That's a different source of creativity. So if polyvagal theory describes our relationship, really describes a part of our our embodiment of experience, positive experience, negative experience, everything in between. I think to think from that perspective, when we're talking about creativity, creativity can come from most of these states. It seems least likely to come from a state of shutdown and dissociation, what we described as the dorsal vagal response.
Although in that response, you can also go into this imaginary realm, right?
That's
You could be,
interesting.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you could be shut down in
Yeah.
terms of
Yeah.
your bodily functioning and your
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
potency in the world, but then your thinking and your, you can really go spiritual
Well,
dimensions, ideas, creativity in another
yeah.
way. Is what I've been.
I would like to talk to people who have experienced that. I have
Mm,
not experienced that very much, but I have people close to me who that's where their body goes. That's where their body mind goes when they experience triggers.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm,
what I see is numbness. What I
mm-hmm,
see is an experience of nothingness.
mm-hmm,
And to
mm-hmm,
be able to, um, creativity can be thought. I see in some people in my life that their form of creativity is in humor and
mm-hmm,
in making amazing interconnections between ideas that just they make my world bigger. It's like, oh my gosh, I hadn't thought of that association before. And I would
mm-hmm,
say that's the form of creativity that they access.
mm-hmm,
That sounds pretty cognitive,
mm-hmm,
right? So now I want to go from, so polyvagally, we can be coming from a variety of different states. If we are in a very safe space, we are much more likely to be able to do integrated thinking. So our right left functioning, right brain, it's
mm-hmm.
the old stereotype is still true that the right brain is where most of our creativity, we call it the creative place, when I will probably challenge that. And left brain is much more narrow and about plans and about things that are concrete and specific. So there's been some updates to that model, but it's still very useful. And, looping back to polyvagal theory, when we are in a state of sympathetic arousal, which is where our fight flight response comes from, then we are much more likely to be sitting in our left brain. And we're much less likely to have access to the right brain. So social relationships can be involved, I think, sort of in both of those ways of functioning, where they are most emotionally connected, physically safe, etc. Then those social relationships are nourishing our safety and our parasympathetic responses and
Mm-hmm.
the functioning of our right brain. So that's this layering of the nervous system with brain functioning, with biochemistry, with our environment. So let's say creativity can come from all of these states. Creativity is a wide range of things. Clinically or therapeutically, I think our interest in creativity is about spending time in that place, whatever it looks like for us, as a way of knowing ourselves, meeting ourselves more fully, and moving towards what we call healing, right? Which is a fuller expression of our potential in this life. So it then kind of loops back to my idea that whatever is going on with your body, mind, spirit, it's probably a brilliant, it's really like 95% a brilliant adaptation to the environment that was reasonable to expect before you were born. Your ancestors' experience are going to predispose your body to be, in your genetics, in your epigenetics, to be oriented to prepare you for a particular type of environment. So it's wonderful sort of biological planning. And then, of course, it outstays the need. It lasts beyond when the immediate need is, and we don't get the early attachment experiences that help us change those epigenetics, use the neuroplasticity of our nervous system to adjust to the current reality. So it takes a long time, and in our time, we have problems, impairments in our microbiome. We have the challenge of environmental toxins like endocrine disruptors that are everywhere, that also impair our ability to shift back into a state where we have access to feelings of safety and calm. So we have lots of things kind of working against our ability to get back to a place of centeredness, appropriate to the moment responses. And we have decades of parenting, parenting advice, parenting standards that are that work against healthy attachment. So we have short-term detachment parenting has been promoted for decades. So most of us, even with parents who, are in good shape themselves and capable of loving with an open heart and being present and feeling safe themselves, we live in times that kind of chip away at the potential for really healthy attachment and resilience. And I think a lot of the really best trainings these days around trauma and stress are emphasizing resilience. Yeah. So creativity can come from many different states. Polyvagal theory will inform us about the nature of that state. It might tell us a lot about the kind of thing we're adapting to. Gives us a way to ask the questions, what is my body adapting to? And, had I known 15 years ago when I started practicing aerial acrobatics or before that, other things that I did, that I was trying to kind of get in sync somehow with the state of my nervous system in a way to respect it, in a way to know it better, and to say, okay, I hear you, I see you. Yes. Now, how can we find safety together? If I had known that, now, of course, I can coach that. And this morning I was teaching my wonderful class called Embodied Flow that's informed by these ideas.
Can you say a little bit more about your class?
Oh, it's so sweet. It's tiny right now. We have 2 students. I started it as
and where is your class?
It's here in Seattle, in the neighborhood that I live in North Seattle. And it's in a pretty well-known yoga studio called Taj Yoga that's in an old elementary school classroom. So it's got this very sweet, grounded vibe, a lot of natural wood. And the class was a grad school project that has just endured, and I started it with a co-facilitator, a licensed psychotherapist named Abby Culkin, and she's taking a little sabbatical right now to focus on building her private practice. But the idea was that I would teach the movement part, and she would teach mindful self-compassion, and that compassion orientation it is just a perfect fit for my approach to respecting our bodies and meeting them where they are at, and not asking everybody to tune into their breath, and not asking everybody to sit quietly, but to say, let's meet you where you are at, and come from that place of respect. It's really that simple. And my students are, I think, experiencing presence for the first time, because we're not pushing it. We're inviting, and we're inviting it through embodiment. And we've defined embodiment, and embodiment is an integrated state, I think, much like creativity is an integrated state. And creativity Okay, I'll take that back. It's not always an integrated state. It can come from really extreme states. It can come from a state of rage, a state of fear. It can come from a, totally blissed out state. But I'm offering my students in embodied flow a movement vocabulary that that meets their needs in terms of knees and backs and shoulders and things like that. And then we polish it every week to try and make it more and more automatic so that they can so that they can shift their attention to the room, to the quality of the floor, possibly to the music. Not everybody is connected to music, and that makes a lot of sense. So we've just developed this sequence, this flow sequence that everybody can do, and the range of students is pretty big. And the class is really for people with chronic pain, fatigue, and illness. So it's for people who have tried other movement classes and become discouraged. And so it's something pretty special. I don't think it's out there. And we do spend some time on psychoeducation, so they do get little tidbits about self-regulation and the autonomic nervous system from me, and functional mobility. So I'm very, very serious about teaching respect for the body through functional mobility, where we develop strength so that the nervous system receives the information that the joints themselves are safe, rather than trying to increase mobility beyond the range that the joint can support. We are, I forgot to turn off my phone. Okay. So the principle applies in strength and mobility also. And I think it's so simple. It's so respectful. It's like your body's like this for a really good reason, a lot of really good reasons, and they go back beyond your lifetime.
And how would you say that your creativity has changed as your own nervous system has changed?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm a photographer, and I would say that certainly we can easily associate photography with creativity. But I'll talk about a couple other ways I think I have expressed that creativity. I started taking pictures that were coming from a place of wanting to communicate something more about my experience of the moment when my kids were little. I had time, I had a camera, and something in me wanted a voice, more of a voice than I had in my life at that time. And the relationship with the subjects was so overflowing with love that I think that combination opened up something pretty special for me. So photography became my way of communicating how I see the moment, how I see the world, and created an amplifier of beauty so that I could communicate. I could feel it more myself, and I could communicate it to others. How I connect with the beauty of any moment. One of my favorite exercises as a photographer, or even without a camera, is to sit in one spot and look around and try and see differently. To try and see the beauty according to me, or something moving, something evocative wherever I'm sitting. And so that my kids, let's see, my son is 22. So I have a daughter who's 19. So I've been doing that for their lifetimes, really. And now I do it professionally. And I do a combination of figures. I have had the amazing experience of working with world-class athletes and photographing performances and events. And then that evolved into art photography of bodies of figures doing beautiful handstands or dance or whatever, and also portrait photography. But what I think has happened in terms of creativity as I have healed slowly over the years from childhood trauma. I am prejudging the outcome less.
Mm.
And my photography is becoming more powerful and more abstract.
Hmm.
So I think some of my best work now is abstract.
Mm.
So
And powerful in what way?
well, my wish is to I have it's not even so much an idea. I have a hunger to get better and bolder about catching moments photographically that are emotionally powerful.
Hmm.
I never pull my camera out and put it in people's faces. I don't want my camera to be mediating in an experience. I want to experience things directly. Looking at anything through a lens really separates me from the experience. If I watch an aerial acrobatics show through my camera, I'm not there. I'm in shapes and light, and it's a very different experience. I don't want to do that to my experiences. So there's some way that there's a timidity. I think it's also sort of reflected in my personality, that there's a timidity about asking something more of people. It's like, will you let me intrude into your experience in this moment, participate in your experience in this moment with my camera? There's just feels like I feel a real barrier around that. So that's part of my growth trajectory. But I would say that the way I'm seeing that open up for me now, interestingly, is with abstract. So there really mostly are not humans in these pictures. So there's something safe in that for me, that I'm playing with my perception of reality and beauty and some intensity through abstract images of non-living things. So it's subtle stuff.
That's cool.
And dance, so dance is becoming, I'm more comfortable showing up with my body in movement as I heal.
Cool.
And problem solving constantly, and the study group constantly.
Yeah, I was wanting to ask you a little bit more about, I really see what you've created as this creative, coming out of this creative spark of yours. This is my lens right now.
Yeah.
And just how this, and I'm weaving together in my mind this study group, and also just your awareness of creating a safe space that you've just really, you said you didn't want to get up in people's faces with the camera, but you sure are, creating boundaries and limits and containment and an environment that's really supportive for people to come learn, and also like in this way where you delineated, it's not like a personal support group. There's more of kind of professional dialogue, although people's lives are touched in meaningful ways.
Yeah,
So
you've got it. It's a really subtle dance.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like there was something, some wisdom beyond myself that came in, and I don't know, I'm not naming that necessarily, but if I were to sit down and think 3.5, 4 years ago, how do I create a mission statement and boundaries and a purpose that's going to support and contain this experience for years to come for thousands of people, I couldn't have done it. But somehow the original mission statement I wrote when I had 6 friends who wanted to study this thing is still what we're working within. So I don't know. I don't really know where it came from. It was an inspiration. So I think I'm a counseling graduate student. I'll be out in about a year. And I think at the time I was in an ethics class.
Interesting.
In part, my mission statement is motivated by wanting to create a group that doesn't go down the path of trading, asking for or offering personal health advice. partly I've seen other groups that spend a lot of time in that place, and it often doesn't look healthy to me. And I was hungry to learn.
Mm.
You know, so I was, on the one hand, I was really motivated to be scholarly and to learn. I had started with one article, Hacking the Nervous System, which was about using vagus nerve stimulation for rheumatoid arthritis, primarily. That was sort of the main focus of the article, and I think it was in the Atlantic or something. And for some reason, I knew I wanted to learn more about it, and it seemed complex, and it just took on a life of its own. So the group comes from a place of wanting to create an ethical framework for counseling professionals and others to not be using a social media space to offer advice. And you know, maybe a third of the members are not like manual therapists or counselors or something like that, or Feldenkrais professionals. They are people who have professions where that ethical obligation is not an issue. But I have to say that, you know, this is my idea of emotional health, really, that this is not the place for that. I have rich, soulful, healthy, connected relationships via the internet, via the study group. I have soul sisters and brothers out there who I would and have spoken with about very personal things, and we do it in a personal space. You know, and I'm just not comfortable doing that in a comment thread, and taking off in that direction. So it came from my personal reaction to that.
What's so cool is that the space, it shows up as like very loving and respectful, and there's like a feeling of like this really nice, good quality feeling of connectedness. Without that explicit personal thread, it's almost like there's an implicit personal, you know, we're all in this together, but we're going to have boundaries around what we do in this particular space, which makes it safe. And so I just think it's really beautiful.
It's a little bit of a mystery, isn't it? I mean, there's some rigidity about it. And people do bump up against that rigidity. It's like, you know, no, we don't. I always recognize that there's another. Okay, I think here's where it comes from. I do not forget that each person I'm interacting with is a person, a multidimensional universe within a body, going through who knows what. And I think there's even something about the fact that we're writing all of this that gives me pause, gives me a moment to collect myself and communicate in a way that to the best of my ability shows that I know that that's another person. And I recognize they have their own backgrounds, stuff going on, their own potential suffering. And that I'm not going to shame them in a public forum by saying, hey, you broke the rules. I rarely have to moderate. There's been maybe one or two instances of somebody being really unkind. And this is in a group of 5,600 or so people. And somehow, like you say, people pick up on the culture of the group, and they get right on board.
I'm also thinking about what you said about your experience with aerial acrobatics, and that you were really looking for an environment that supported your internal intensity, and that met you there, and you felt the safety in that meeting. And I'm just thinking about the relationship between where your nervous system is at now in terms of intensity and modulation and all of that, like how you are creating this space that then people are meeting, you know, finding themselves in this dialogue. in this
Yes.
space. Yeah.
Yes. And moderating that is tricky. You know, I do see people get triggered, get confused, get upset that I'm setting limits with them, you know. And what I hope will happen when I have those engagements is that they will feel permission to make mistakes. Mistakes being bumping up against the edges of the community agreements. And I have had many experiences of people who I thought, boy, this is pretty high maintenance, and I'm not sure this person's going to stick around in the group. And I've had many experiences of those people sticking with it and becoming very self-regulated, very lots of equanimity, wonderful contributors as they're changing in their life probably, but I also think the group might play a role in being a safe place for them to come and express who they are.
So cool.
No, it's tricky. And I have a new leadership circle, so I felt pretty burned out after a very difficult conversation a couple months ago about there was a report that came out from the American Psychological Association on men and boys, and it was about the problems with our enculturated version of masculinity. And in the group, it immediately got translated into the term toxic masculinity, which is very triggering for a lot of people. And the conversation was the hardest thing I've ever moderated. And we lost a couple members over it. And after that, I was either going to need to quit or take a break, which I've done before, and or get help. And I got help. So we now have a leadership circle.
Nice.
And we're all learning together how to do this. It's one thing to do it when I'm the only one making decisions, and another to communicate the culture to other people and do it together.
Yeah, that's a whole another level of learning. Yeah.
And it is a creative project. Back to that theme. You know, in thinking about this conversation when it was upcoming, one thing that characterizes creativity for me is the ability to move from the right brain to the left, to more broadly speaking, integrate the functioning of different brain areas. I'm interested in some of the entheogenic research, so research on the use of psychedelic substances for healing of all kinds. And the science is that's coming out is fascinating. And one of the things that they think is especially healing about psilocybin is that it causes it reduces the functioning in what we call the default mode network. And when we're living our normal lives constantly in our heads, narrowly focused on all the things that we have to do, we're primarily operating in the default mode network. And psilocybin tends to redistribute brain activity more broadly, so that there's a more integrated functioning of all the different parts of the brain. So I am not really capable of speaking anatomically about the brain. I find it completely overwhelming, but I get the idea that using more parts of the brain and having better connections between the different parts of the brain allows us to think more broadly. It allows us to think outside the box. So that can be a source of creativity. And I try and model that in the study group by going between narrowly defined scientific papers, you know, a report on the newest thinking about the microbiome or something like that. And it's an original scientific paper. So it's written by the authors of the study. And then zoom out to poetry. You know, and I love that feeling in myself. It's a relief. It's a deep breath. It's a to move to poetry. And I think there's something generative about that dance between narrow and wide.
Mm-hmm.
Not saying one is better than the other, but our flexibility and our capacity to move between different ways of seeing, it feels very healthy to me. And the better I am at that, the more free I am in my own personal creativity.
It's interesting. I'm just having this overlay of thinking about Feldenkrais and movement, and that, and how we use our attention in movement, attending to like a specific place or a specific quality, or this broader global awareness. And I think in my early Feldenkrais studies, Feldenkrais talks about the thinking, moving, sensing, feeling, that it's all one, and that this supports you, this practice supports you to integrate all of those. And I think that the thing that has been really helpful for me with organic intelligence is really actually differentiating those. Thinking.
I did this in my class this morning. That's exactly what we
feeling,
do.
Sensing, the orientation, and that those, like, separating them actually, and seeing like which ones I'm more habitual, or which ones are more familiar and which ones are less familiar, and even differentiating within them different feelings, or different thoughts and qualities of thought, but then bringing them back together, there's more of a full integration.
Precisely.
Which,
this is my definition of embodiment. It means that, I don't objectify my body as a thing, and I am my body, and that I can notice. This is the cool thing about being human. I can get very meta. I can notice my own thoughts, or I can pretty well, I'm better at it, experience myself as all those things at one time. And, so much of polyvagal theory is like informing why we have emotions that we experience in our bellies, why we have gut feelings. Well, the vagus nerve, has branches that innervate parts of the gut. And so we understand that anatomically, and I love the way, I think, so my focus on the vagus study group is, it's really now the embodiment of our experience group, organized around the vagus, which I've considered, like, is that a bad thing? And I think no, because I see the vagus as the messenger.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's not the message necessarily. Maybe there's biochemical changes, or behavioral changes or whatever, but so much of this is communicating through this part of our anatomy. So gut feelings, I can't remember how I started, but it's really about our embodiment.
And then also the vagus represents this, I have this image of it in my head, but of this pathway towards social connection. So it's not like our embodiment in our own little worlds.
Yes.
But actually our interconnection and our
I
relationship.
kind of feel like that's the hardest thing to talk about in the study group. It's my happy place, going to a philosophical place, or to understanding ourselves as part of the broader ecology of the universe. So we are an ecosystem, only because we have this mind that wants to divide things into parts. But so we are an ecosystem, and we are within an ecosystem of my home. I am within the ecosystem of Seattle. I am the ecosystem of the earth. So, and potentially in a state of oneness with the universe. So I want to speak of our embodiment as being continuous with the planet. And fascinating that those discussions start looking political. So it becomes tricky. And I have been accused of, wait a minute, I thought this group was not political. and then I decided to say all trauma is political. So that is part of the interconnectedness of all things. And why that is political, we're not going to go into. But it has implications for respect and humanity and social justice and all kinds of things.
Yeah. So rich. I'm like so happy that we did this, and what a honor just to be in your presence and
Tiffany, thank you.
to hear you. I love reading what you write. And hearing you speak now and being with you is a gift. So thank you. I'm so happy that other people will get to hear what you
and
are saying.
if there are listeners who would like to join the study group, it's the Vagus, VAGUS study group on Facebook. And we are in a cycle of accepting new members every 2 weeks. And we do have filtering questions. So if you've never bumped into those before, when joining a group on Facebook, the groups have an option of asking you a few questions, just to create a little bit of a barrier, so that you kind of have to. It's meant to be educational for the Vegas study group. It's like, hey, heads up, this is not a support group. That's the main thing, and like, are you paying attention? And so answer those 3 questions, and we'll accept new members every 2 weeks.
Great. Well, thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate it so much.
Yes. All right. Bye.
But
okay. Well, in response to your comment that we're finding this common ground, having come from very different places in terms of the training and culture of our professions or our passions. And I think it's an interesting question, is like, what's the nature of the intersection? So, and of course, this comes in large part from my experience of connecting with people in the study group. And the variety of places that people are coming from is fascinating. And yet we know when we have hit this sort of sweet spot of like, ooh, yeah, that, somehow we're in a place of richness and truth. And what is the nature of that place?
Yeah. That's a good place.
I don't know.
that's a good sweet spot to end, and to like do that Rilke thing, live the question.
Ooh,
perhaps someday, without ever noticing it, you'll live your way into the answer.
There you go. I know what it feels like.
Yeah. Me too.
Thank you.
Thanks.